So I want you to think about the last time you knew what somebody was thinking before they even said anything. Now, how do you think you knew what that person was thinking? Probably because you were reading their body language, right? All right. So as a speaker, one of the tools that we have to communicate our message has nothing to do with words, and it has everything to do with our voice and the message that our body is giving off. So right now I'm going to talk through several vocabulary words that I want you to start to think about as you make your speeches for this class. Okay, the first thing I want you to think about, and we have all heard about them, is verbal fillers and non-fluencies. All right, so what do you think these are? You probably already know, right? Okay, so non-fluencies are words like or stuff like that. So do you know why we use non-fluencies? Usually non-fluencies are included to fill the space in between words. Usually what they're indicating is don't interrupt me, I'm thinking, I'm not done talking, I'm going to talk in just a second, stuff like that. So as a public speaker, a few non-fluencies really isn't a bad thing. They become a problem when you create a pattern. Okay, same thing with verbal fillers. Verbal fillers are kind of like non-fluencies, except they're full words. So, you know when people have, they'll say, like, it's like this, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know. Okay, stuff like that. Those are called verbal fillers. Again, verbal fillers, they're not a problem until it becomes a pattern, until it becomes really repetitive. Okay, moving on. The next thing I want to talk about is proxemics. So proxemics, probably a word you're not as familiar with, but I bet you're familiar with the concept. Proxemics is your use of space. So how close are you to your audience? How far are you from your audience? Now, in the online world, proxemics are a little bit harder, but we can still play with them by leaning in, by leaning back, stuff like that. If you're walking around a room, and you may at some point in this class, you'll want to play with proxemics. And by that I mean walk closer to your audience. How does that change their experience? Walk away from your audience, making sure that you are stepping closer to either side and really filling up your space. The next thing I want to talk about is articulation. So articulation talks about the emphasis that we put on our consonants in our words. So articulation, this is something that we have a lot of variation with, a lot of room to play with it. And we can ramp it up or take it down intentionally based on our situation or based on the effect that we want to have. So if I want to sound very proper, or if I want my voice to carry a long way over a long distance, I might want to articulate very clearly. So you see how when we're close like this or within this video setting, that sounds a little bit weird, right? Now, on the other hand, I can try to soften my articulation. And when we soften our articulation, what that means is sometimes our words run together. You see what I'm saying? It's a little bit harder to understand. Now, I'm not really good at isolating my articulation with my volume, so you'll notice that my volume dropped down a little bit when I tried that. So, something to think about. Usually, in this kind of a situation, we just want to make sure that people understand us. So if you have a dialect or something like that, you'll want to make sure that you practice your articulation. Tongue twisters are a good way to practice that. Also, just saying those consonants over and over, like d, 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 b, 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 g, g, g. Those kinds of things strengthen your articulating muscles. All right, so that's articulation. Next, I want to talk about projection. So you might think that in an online class, projection really isn't very important, right? Because I've got this microphone, I'm going to be close to my computer, and you'd be, I understand you, but you'd be wrong. So the thing with projection is we want to make sure that we are projecting to the back of the space. And the impulse in this online environment is because you're so close to your computer and you're probably in your room, you're probably by yourself, and so the impulse is to speak very quietly. The problem is that changes the tone of your voice. So it changes the way that your voice is actually coming out of your mouth. So ideally, you want to speak in this online environment like you're trying to speak to somebody on the other side of your room. All right, whether anybody is there or not, that kind of projection is going to help you sound more professional. Okay? Next, we're going to talk about volume. So volume is not the same as projection. Projection is just shooting your room to the back, filling that space, and that has to do with resonance and breath. Volume, we think about volume the way we think about dynamics in music. So I can still project very strongly and create a softer sound, or I can get louder, and it changes the way my audience responds to the message that I'm saying. All right, so with volume, one of the things that we want to do is notice that when I make a change, it makes my audience pay attention. All right, that's volume. Next, we're going to talk about gestures. You've probably noticed that I'm using some hand gestures right now. Even though we are in the online environment, hand gestures communicate a lot. And usually what hand gestures communicate is the emotive quality that goes along with the words that you're saying. So we use our hand gestures for emphasis, we use them to include enthusiasm, stuff like that. What I would like to see you do in this class is make sure that you frame yourself so that you can include hand gestures in your presentations. And finally, we want to think about eye contact. Eye contact is incredibly important. It's one of the hardest things to do, especially in the online environment, but without eye contact, it does not feel like you are talking to us. For the online environment, it's even harder. What it means is that you have to stare at the camera 95% of the time. In an in-person environment, especially when you have a number of people in your audience, that makes it, believe it or not, a little bit easier because you're able to distribute your eye contact between several different people. All right, so these are the words that we've gone over so far. We'll add more as we continue in this class, but I've talked about non-fluencies and verbal fillers. I've talked about proxemics. I've talked about articulation. I've talked about projection and volume, gestures, and eye contact. What I want to know from you is what delivery skill is your strongest? And what delivery skill do you think is your weakest? All right, this has been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm looking forward to working with you this month. Bye.